I try not to speculate too hard when it comes to new hardware, especially when it comes to Nintendo, where there has just been so many different rumors over the years in terms of releasing a Pro-level system, and right now we're going through the entire phase of a potential Switch 2. We actually have recently gotten the first bit of news that sounds actually probably accurate, indicating that their next hardware would release sometime late next year, probably around the holiday season. And so with that first bit of actual news, I have begun to let myself just think a little bit more about what Nintendo might be up to, or really just what I think would be really cool to see. With that in mind, anytime I see a report or bit of news that seems actually reliable and gives us indications of what Nintendo might be doing for the next system out sometime late next year, I'm definitely going to make a video on it, so subscribe so you don't miss out on that stuff. But what I want to talk about today is just knowing that we're now entering that phase where new hardware is likely on its way late next year. I want to talk about the things that I would love to see with a Nintendo Switch successor. Now, one thing worth noting is that based on what we know about Nintendo's next hardware so far, assuming the most recent reports are true, it's not actually guaranteed that it's going to be a direct Switch successor that is a hybrid console. We know it's at least going to be supporting a portable mode specifically, but docked functionality has not really been talked about yet in these early reports. That said, a lot of what I'm hoping to see, and I think a lot of people are interested in seeing from Nintendo, is a direct Switch successor, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on in terms of this wish list of what I would love to see out of this next bit of hardware. Some of the stuff I think is the fairly standard wish list you probably heard a couple people talk about. I still want to touch on those really quick and why I think it's important, but there are also some slightly more unrealistic, unhinged ideas that I think would be really cool if Nintendo acted on them. As far as upgrades to the system go, there's a couple things that have been talked about over the years when we've speculated about things like a Switch Pro or now with a Switch 2 that I think are givens. Faster storage to begin with is actually one of the biggest things for me. I know a lot of people tend to focus on other aspects like the visuals, which is important as well and I'll talk about, but honestly when it comes to my experience using the Switch, the bigger thing that really impacts me going between that and other consoles isn't the visual difference, but the loading time difference. Nintendo first party has gotten good enough with some of their games that they can really hide their loading screens well. Tears of the Kingdom is a great example of this, where you have an initial loading screen that can take a good bit of time for getting in the game, and yeah, you have to deal with loading screens here and there when you fast travel, but as far as how smoothly the game allows you to traverse its very large world with minimal load times and how relatively fast the load times are, it's not bad. When you look at a lot of third-party stuff on Switch though, that doesn't tend to be the case. There's a lot of third-party titles that have very, very long load times, and part of that just has to do with the limitations of the internal storage on the Nintendo Switch, and especially with the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 moving over to SSDs and noticing the difference in loading times on those versus their past-gen consoles, I just really feel those load times on the Switch. And so while there's a lot of internal aspects that could be improved, faster internal storage is really at the highest of my list of things that I want to see happen with the Switch, because especially with a handheld system where I'm just on the go and playing stuff, I don't want to be staring at load screens. Now, speaking of the visuals department, this is somewhat of a sore spot subject, I think, when it comes to the Switch. Personally, I don't have a big problem with Nintendo being relatively behind the other consoles when it comes to power. A lot of people seem to think that Nintendo's next piece of hardware has to be somehow this competitively very powerful system, when the Switch was behind its competition at the time and has done just fine. There is the argument that they could get more third-party support if they had a stronger system, which I could see, but Nintendo is definitely more focused on their first parties and indie market and getting those third-party titles that can run on the system smoothly. That said, I think one thing that does go a long way, and this has been a long rumored thing that people have wanted to see on the Switch, DLSS. While I don't think a Switch successor necessarily needs to be this powerhouse machine that's running everything in native 4K with 60 frames while in docked mode, it would be really nice if it embraced DLSS as a method of being able to display games at a lower internal resolution that is then pushed out and still looks nice on a larger screen display. You can already see an example of this with the Steam Deck actually, where using AMD's equivalent, you can run games at a lower internal resolution and have them look a lot shinier on larger displays when the Steam Deck is being docked, and having an option like that on a Switch successor would be wonderful. Now, I think an important difference here is that when it comes to the Nintendo Switch being a more general consumer-friendly option, a lot of the more of that stuff needs to be on the back end. With the Steam Deck, it's a option that you have some customization over. You can select how you want to do it for different games. It would definitely need to be something that's more of a back-end profile for the Switch, where it just does it automatically and it's whatever the dev thinks is the right balance running on that hardware. But I think that can go a long way in terms of balancing out having a Switch successor that is not necessarily going to be the most powerful handheld ever and remain at an affordable price point, which I think is important to Nintendo, but could leverage having a much better looking image on 4K displays versus what we're currently seeing on the Switch, where 1080 just is starting to really show its age, especially on larger screens. And for the matter, it would also be really nice to see a Switch successor embrace HDR. I don't think Nintendo's necessarily going to be on top of things to the point where, similar to the Xbox, they'd be having Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. PlayStation is catching up on that as well with just having recently introduced Atmos in a beta. I don't see that really being a focus for Nintendo, but just HDR10 would be wonderful just to really get a little bit of extra color pop. While the current rumors for Nintendo's upcoming hardware places it having an LCD screen, I do think it's a possibility that an OLED screen is something that could happen down the line as part of a mid-cycle refresh, and so HDR10 would be something that would pair beautifully with that for handheld gaming, not to mention it's obviously just something you could take advantage of when the system is docked. There's a couple other things I would hope for. Obviously, build quality of the system, something that's more along the lines of the Switch OLED that just feels more sturdy compared to the original version of the Switch, particularly the launch model that had a lot of issues with heat damage over time. Backwards compatibility is a huge deal, something that I would love to see. It's not a make or break for me personally, but I could definitely see that being a major issue for a lot of people if they released a new system and it was not backwards compatible with the Switch, assuming it is, again, another hybrid console and not something entirely different. There is one particular thing I've been thinking about lately, though, that I think would be so cool to see if this was a hybrid system. And I don't think it's very likely to happen. I don't think this is even something Nintendo's even considering, but I would just really be happy if it was something that could happen. With the Switch's ability of obviously having its own built-in display and having the ability to dock to a TV, having the core functionality for it in its own games, being able to just simply be a single screen focus, either on the go or docked to a TV, is how I think the system should work. But it would be really interesting if Nintendo opened up some kind of alternative dock option where instead of the system going into the dock and then that display no longer matters and you're focused on what's happening on the TV, they maybe take a little bit of a cue from what they did on the 3DS and the Wii U with dual screen functionality. And I don't necessarily mean I want this for the core experience of the system. I think that's something that was a little hit and miss with a lot of people, obviously with the Wii U especially. Part of that was definitely also the marketing issues. But I think my main interest in here really is the idea of having a system that not only is a Switch successor in terms of being a hybrid console, but something that can also help keep alive some of the libraries and interesting aspects of the 3DS and Wii U. Obviously, Nintendo has been trying to dip into a lot of their older catalog on the Switch, not always in ways that I enjoy by having a lot of things limited to Nintendo Switch Online, but we've also seen a lot of remasters and ports and re-releases of past titles, and one of the biggest things we've seen a lot of people clamor for wanting to see on the Switch library is more and more old classics coming back. For instance, some missing Legend of Zelda remasters like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. And so specifically for the idea of bringing back some Wii U versions of games, along with having some remastered and better looking versions of 3DS games that maintain the dual screen functionality, I think that would be just the coolest damn thing to see happen with a Switch successor. I understand why it wouldn't be a core function, but there are so many great games that really only make sense in a dual screen setup that currently can't really come back on modern hardware. With the 3DS eShop closing and obviously the Wii U just being gone for the reasons I understand, there are a lot of games locked to those that, sure, you could port or remaster in some way, but it wouldn't necessarily maintain the right proper experience if it didn't have that dual screen function. I mean, a great example of this, right, is that we've seen lots of major Wii U games ported over to the Switch. Most of the strongest library is there, but there are some games that don't really work quite the same, and some games that are still trapped on the Wii U because that functionality was so specific to it, like with the Nintendo Land games. It's just the more I think about the Nintendo Switch and maintaining Nintendo's past legacy, there's already a lot of work being done putting a lot of their greatest hits and big name games on the Switch where possible, and there's just limitations based on just the design of some of their other consoles like the Wii U and 3DS, where those things can't really be brought over in the same way, and opening up that kind of functionality on a Switch successor would be fantastic. I don't think it's the kind of thing Nintendo's gonna do, but I can dream. So that's just a quick little list of things I would love to see on a Switch successor. Most of them I think are fairly standard asks at this point, with one exception being definitely a bizarre thing, but I think would be cool. And if there's anything you particularly want to see on their next handheld system, whether that's a Switch hybrid or not, let me know down below in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.